Hello and welcome to Senior Speak New Hampshire. I'm Dan Wise, your host. I'm also a volunteer with AARP, which is a sponsor of this show. Imagine if you witnessed someone losing their money, being robbed, and you couldn't stop it. Or imagine there was a big hole or tripping hazard on the sidewalk in front of your house, and you were worried that someone who was maybe visually impaired or were simply inattentive was going to step into that big hole and hurt themselves, or really cause themselves a serious injury. You'd want to do something about that, right? Well, we're going to talk about something like that today. There are machines all over the state of New Hampshire that are they're in convenience stores and gas stations and supermarkets, and these machines allow you to buy digital currency. They're known as Bitcoin ATMs or cyber or crypto ATMs. You feed cash into these machines, and they convert it into digital currency that can be deposited into your crypto account or someone else's crypto account. And it turns out that these machines are very often used by swindlers, by scammers, who prey on people who they have convinced they need to take out money and give it to them or to give it to some entity, and they're going to do it through these Bitcoin ATM machines. And you've heard about gift card scams. Well, this is the latest iteration of that kind of thing. And that there are incredible estimates of how much money, how many millions of dollars are being lost by people right here in New Hampshire, as well as nationally, to scammers who have victimized people into putting their money into these crypto ATM machines, where the money disappears. It disappears into accounts that belong to the criminals, and there's an anonymous track that money goes into, where that money is not recoverable in many cases. We have two guests to talk about this situation today. Mike Padmore is Associate Director of Advocacy at AARP in New Hampshire, and Lieutenant Thomas Yerkes of the Concord Police Department. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you.
Coming today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Before we get into our conversation, we're going to run a video from AARP. It's an overview of how these machines work on a national level and on how it relates. And then we'll be back and have a conversation about here in New Hampshire.
Crypto ATMs look a lot like regular ATMs. You might not even notice you've passed one in the grocery store or gas station. But the way they work is totally different. These machines aren't connected to banks. They are used by people to convert cash into cryptocurrency, but criminals are using them as a payment method in their scams. Here's how crypto ATM scammers steal millions from consumers. In a crypto ATM scam, fraudsters trick victims into withdrawing their own cash and depositing it into a cryptocurrency kiosk to purchase virtual currency that's then sent to a scammer's crypto wallet. Confusing, right? Scammers love cryptocurrency because it has the benefit of not being well understood by most consumers, and it can be difficult to trace. And while scams like this come in all shapes and sizes, they often start with a false sense of urgency. It could be an out-of-the-blue communication from what you think is your utility company, saying your account is delinquent and they are sending someone to cut off your electricity unless you can pay now. Or it could be from someone claiming to be from your bank, saying someone is actively hacking your account, and the solution is to move money out of it and into another account now. The list goes on, but the next step is the same. They direct you to withdraw a certain amount of cash from your bank and head to the nearest crypto ATM. They might even give you directions on how to get there. So helpful, right? Then they give you specific instructions on how to deposit the cash into the machine and send it. Once you complete the transaction, you might think you've taken care of your problem, but the reality couldn't be farther from the truth. What you've done without realizing it is you've converted your money into cryptocurrency and given it to the criminal. Once that transaction happens, the scammer stops communicating with you, and you start to realize it was a scam from the beginning and your money's been stolen. Because cryptocurrency is not backed by any government institution and transactions can be tough to trace, the chances of getting your money back are slim, which is a big benefit for criminals who steal millions and dodge law enforcement. The bottom line is that no bank, business, or government agency will seek payment through a crypto ATM. So protect yourself. If you do get an urgent message from your bank or a utility or even a friend, contact them directly. If the message didn't come from them, disengage. Any problem that must be solved with money sent through a crypto ATM is a scam. Full stop. For more information on cryptocurrency and scams, go to aarp.org/cryptofraud.
Okay, well, that should give you kind of an introduction to what's going on with these machines. Lieutenant Yerkes, how big of a problem is this in Concord? You're in charge of the Criminal Investigation Bureau in Concord Police Department?
Yes.
First of all, how many machines are there, these Bitcoin type machines are there in our municipality here?
In the city of Concord, we have 15 stores with Bitcoin ATM machines. Mm-hmm. Some of them are solely Bitcoin ATM machines for cryptocurrency. Others are dual function, so they look like a regular ATM machine. But there's buttons on there that
they can do
use.
both.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So how big of a problem is this in Concord?
We feel it's a very big problem, and it's a growing problem. It's not stopping. We feel that the victims that fall prey to this, it's a huge problem for them. It's very disheartening for us as law enforcement officers to hear the stories of how these people got scammed. The scams themselves, they always start with a story that's going to elicit some sort of emotional response from the victim. Your loved one is in trouble. You owe money. Something bad's going to happen if you don't pay this. And so the scam starts from there. They suck these people in with that story, and these people are hooked. And a lot of times we go out to scenes, and it takes us as law enforcement with uniforms on sometimes hours to get these people to understand that their transaction's not legitimate and it's a fraud. Once we do start investigating cases, they're very difficult to solve. The digital trace that these transactions leave, they don't lead to anybody here in this town, in this state, in this country, most likely. And so we're seeing our victims walk away from us after hearing us say to them, gee, I'm sorry this happened to you and you lost a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And for us as law enforcement, that's not acceptable. We have to do more.
Yeah. What are some of the amounts that we're talking about?
So majority of the amounts that we see here in Concord are $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000. We do get some lower amounts here and there, but it's always in the thousands. And some of these people have worked their whole lives and saved this money up. Some of this money is supposed to be passed down generationally to grandkids for whatever, for their education, to a down payment on a house, to start their lives without debt. And when it comes time for those people to collect that money, there's no money there.
Yeah.
And it's creating huge problems in the big picture for us.
And it's really hard to, you can't go to the the operators of these machines. What happens when you go to the operators of the machines and say, "We know this is a phony situation"? What happens then?
Well, technically, the transaction is legitimate. They're putting money in willingly. Is what the ATM machine companies will have you believe. The common denominator we see in all these cases that we investigate is somebody standing in front of a machine in a store, a convenience store, a gas station, a supermarket, with a large stack of cash, and they're feeding that machine for sometimes upward to an hour and a half, because it's one bill at a time. So we get store owners and store clerks and managers who intervene, because we do have really good people here in Concord that care about the community and care about our victims. So they'll see this happening and they'll recognize it, and they'll step in sometimes and say, "Hey, you sure you know what you're doing here? Is this something you want to do?" And then they'll call us, and hopefully we can intervene in time before too much of that money is gone. But that's what we're seeing in these cases throughout our city, and that's what we're seeing nationwide and in every state.
And the money goes somewhere that isn't traceable. So can the Bitcoin company machine operator, can they tell you where the money is gone?
Yes, we have ways to investigate it. There's certain receipts that are left from the transactions. I kind of describe it as similarly as being pickpocketed. So if you're at a concert and somebody bumps into you in the crowd and steals your wallet, and you see him 5 minutes later and you say, "That was the person who bumped into me, I think he has my wallet." Your wallet's been passed to 6 or 7 different people in the meantime, and it's out of the building by the time you know what's going on. It's similar. The crypto ATM machines are similar in that vein, as our victims' money goes into a digital wallet, and then that money is very quickly dispersed to several other crypto wallets in the virtual world.
So maybe the wallet that it initially went into, they discontinue that account or whatever, and then
Correct.
Sort of like a burner phone. It's like they stop using that, and meanwhile the money's been transferred elsewhere.
Correct.
And it's hard to trace.
It is. And unfortunately, a lot of these cases, when we do investigate them from beginning to end, and we do locate wallets, virtual wallets, and the transaction and the money going in and out of them, we don't have a human being in this country to arrest. And so a lot of our cases end up just dead-end cases. And as I said, we have to explain that to a victim. There are some cases where we have been able to seize money and get that money back to the victims, but those cases are few and far between, related to the amount of cases we get.
Mike, fighting fraud is a major priority for AARP, and we'll be talking about some legislation that is active in Concord right now. Why is this such a big priority for AARP as an organization?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Dan. So, nationally and here in New Hampshire, we focus on fraud prevention in general as an organization, because we know that older adults are disproportionately targeted by criminals for scams. And so, when it comes to focusing on crypto ATMs and the scams and the fraud that's associated with these machines, the reason why we're focusing on it is because we're seeing a growing and a really scary trend across the country, not just across the country, but again here even in New Hampshire, where we've seen this skyrocket over the last 5 years. The Federal Trade Commission has data that has showed that fraud losses linked to crypto ATMs went from $12 million in 2020 to $114 million in 2023, and then the FBI reports that losses linked to crypto ATMs reached over $333 million in 2025. And so, it's the reason why we're focusing on it is because we're seeing this trend, and we want to see if we can prevent this from continuing to grow.
So is So sort of the activity of scammers who are always around and always using the phone and whatever means to reach people, this is becoming a more preferred vehicle. Is that kind of what you would say?
It is, and as I said before, we're not making arrests on this. We're not charging people criminally, human beings anyway, with these actions, and so why would they stop until we have an implement in place to stop them?
Wow, and there's folks in the digital currency enthusiasts and people that they say that these machines are a convenience for people who want to get into digital currency, and I think that's how the machines started. It was a way to popularize digital currency. Do we have any statistics on the degree to which these machines are serving people who are willing investors versus the scam victims?
Yeah, we do. So in 2025, the Iowa Attorney General's office, they filed suit against two of the major crypto ATM operators in the country. It's Bitcoin Depot and CoinFlip. And their investigation, they found that 94% of transactions made at CoinFlip machines were fraudulent, and 98% of transactions made at Bitcoin Depot's machines were fraudulent. That's a staggering number when you hear that. And so, but we've also heard from the crypto ATM industry. So their Bitcoin Depot is a public company, and so they have earnings calls every quarter. And during a November 2025 earnings call, they reported that their average median transaction is $350. And so I think what we found is that, and I would be curious to see if our law enforcement has also seen this, but some of the smaller transactions, those seem to be the more legitimate transactions. Folks going into a gas station and putting maybe $100 or a couple $100 into a machine to invest it there. But the larger transactions, I think that's where we're seeing a lot of fraud associated with those types of transactions.
And the types of things that that the store owners and the managers describe to us. I've visited every one of our stores and I've talked to all the store managers in our city, and I have stories that run the gamut. But I have one store where the manager says, "Yep, there's a pizza place across the street. One of their employees comes in every 2 or 3 months, and he does a transaction." And I said, "How long does he stand here?" And she said, "Oh, 2 or 3 minutes." And then we have other stores where these higher end, the higher numbers are lost, and we talk to those folks, and they say they're standing here for an hour and a half, but always on the phone. So there's definitely a difference in how these transactions are done. It's very noticeable what is a legitimate transaction and what is not.
Wow. And so now it's time to talk about, there's a bill in the legislature that, well, first of all, what is the status of regulation of these machines now? Because as you said, that if somebody puts that money in there, and even if a policeman shows up in the middle of it, they can't get that money back necessarily. The companies aren't responsible for refunding anything that's, even if you say right off the bat that it's a false transaction. I mean, you deal with a bank, there's ways to recover money that went through a bank. But how is this industry regulated right now? At the state level, there are some federal sort of regulations that they have to abide by as a
through FinCEN, but effectively they are unregulated, at the state level, and that's why I think we're seeing these machines be exploited, by criminals to facilitate these scams. And so, from our perspective, what we really try to do is when we're from AARP's perspective, when we're trying to prevent fraud, it's twofold. One is education, and so we try to offer as many educational opportunities as we possibly can, for folks around the state to learn about what are some of the common scams, what are the best practices that you can utilize to protect yourself and loved ones. We send out communication, we do media opportunities like this, we hold events, but that only goes so far. I mean, we can only educate so many people. Only so many people are going to watch this program, and so the second prong of that is policy focused. And so there was a bill, Senate Bill 482, was introduced this year, really to address this issue. And there's a few main components of the bill. One is a daily transaction limit that is $2,000 for customers, and we feel that that's a reasonable thing to have in place, because I think what we've seen is about 24 states right now have enacted legislation and enacted protections between transaction limits and then also refunds. Basically having a refund period where an individual who has been scammed has however many days, whether it's 14 or 90 days, has an opportunity to not only notify law enforcement of the fraudulent nature of the transaction, but then with the actual ATM operator to make that request for a refund.
So would they require the operator, the machine folks, to hold the money for a particular, hold that money instead of sending it through, or are they liable for it?
It's a good question. So there's sort of two different approaches. One is having a hold period for a short period of time. And so actually in the legislation, there is a 48-hour hold period for an individual's first transaction. And what that does is it literally puts that transaction in limbo. It doesn't execute the transaction and finalize it until 48 hours have elapsed. And then in that 48-hour period, the person has an opportunity to cancel it and get a full refund for that. That is good, but the reality is that I think from our standpoint, and I think what our folks in law enforcement have also seen, is that it's not all that common that someone recognizes that they've been scammed within that 48-hour period. And so having that longer period to recognize you've been scammed and then reach out to not only law enforcement, again the operator, to request that refund, we think is pretty reasonable. And I think the reality is that there's so much. There's sort of two aspects that we've seen, with older adults especially, because I think they've been the ones who have generally been targeted for these scams utilizing these machines. And I think, there's sort of two aspects of it. One is there's such a stigma around if someone has been a victim of fraud. Folks might be embarrassed. They might not want to share with a loved one or share with law enforcement, report it to law enforcement. And so having that opportunity that gives them a few weeks at least to reach out to law enforcement is so crucial. And I think the other aspect is that there's a lot of folks who the way that they realize that they've been scammed, not even just at a crypto ATM, but any type of scam, is perhaps when they talked with maybe the person who is their caregiver. Maybe it's their son or their daughter who they talk with on a fairly regular basis, and they have a phone call with their daughter a week or two later, and they say, hey, I got this crazy phone call, and they asked me to take out $10,000 and put it into one of these machines. And I think another thing we've seen too is that a number of caregivers they might monitor the person who they're caring for. They might monitor their bank account, right, or something like that, and they might see maybe a month later they'll see a large transaction or a large withdrawal from the bank, and they'll reach out to their the person they're caring for, and they'll say, hey, what was this? And so that's why I think having that refund period is so crucial, because that's really the only way that these folks can be made whole. Because as the lieutenant has said, it is such a challenge for us to recover this money in cases of scams.
So we're having these states do this kind of legislation, and from what I've heard before is that Vermont and Maine have restrictions like this in place already, and Massachusetts is in the process also. So that might mean that New Hampshire, if New Hampshire doesn't do this, we would be even more of our citizens would be even more of a target. Would you think that would be true?
I agree. The border towns on these states would be, you'd see an influx of machines in New Hampshire on our side of the border. And when we are behind the curve on this, New Hampshire is definitely behind the curve. When you look at the statutes from other states, they started where we are. They started back in early 2024, passing their bills in that year, and then early 2025, and here we are in 2026, and we're just getting started. So we're definitely behind in this, and I think the states that don't have any kind of regulation, you'll see just a drastic increase in these cases going forward.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, so Dan, you mentioned that there are a number of states that have passed this. So 24 states have enacted protections, and this is a mix of Republican and Democratic states. So there's no partisan aspect to kind of who is really trying to fix this problem. And I think the reality is that it's logical, right? Criminals are going to go where there are the biggest opportunity for them to make money, and so they're focusing on those states with either no limits or the highest limits possible. And so what we're really focused on, with the legislation is trying to make it so that we are somewhat aligned with a number of the other states, not just here in New England, but also around the country, because again, they're going to focus on those states where they can make the most amount of money. And I think, the thing that we found is since a number of states have enacted these protections and these transaction limits, we actually have some evidence that these are working. Some folks in law enforcement in California, where they have enacted these transaction limits, have said after that transaction limit went into effect, they have seen a noticeable drop in the amount of fraud associated with these crypto ATMs. And so I think this is just a logical step for us to take, to protect our folks here in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think? Does this have a negative impact on the crypto digital currency industry? How do you think what the impact will be on the folks who believe in investing in digital currency?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the way that we look at this is that right now, these machines are being exploited, and so establishing some protections that will make it so that criminals will stop targeting these types of machines to take people's money. I think, if anything, it makes these more legitimate, right? These machines and cryptocurrency makes it even more legitimate because it's taking away that incentive for criminals to really target and utilize these machines for these types of scams and fraud.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I remember I was talking about this earlier, that these machines are actually not a very good, that people who get into investing in these digital currencies actually end up doing this more online or with bank transfers and things like that, rather than feeding cash into a machine, because of that these machines have like a very high commission fee.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I think our information says that the fees associated with making a transaction using one of these machines is usually anywhere between about 10 and 30%, give or take.
Wow.
And if you go on your phone and you use Coinbase is one of the probably most common apps for transacting digital currency, it's usually somewhere between 1 and 3%, to make those those transactions. So I think when it comes down to it, like the Senate Bill 482, what this would do is it enacts those protections like that, that $2,000 transaction limit that really mitigates catastrophic loss. That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to prevent someone from, as Lieutenant Yerkes talked about, someone losing, maybe their entire life savings. I mean, we've had examples recently, around the state where people are transacting tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent manners, and so that's really what our goal is mitigate the catastrophic loss. And as we've talked about, and as as I referenced before, Bitcoin Depot said their average transactions are a few $100s anyway, right? And so, when it comes to, is this preventing, someone who wants to go and make a legitimate transaction at these machines? We don't see this as hindering that, because the average transaction is below that $2,000 limit anyway, right? Exactly. And so if this will prevent somebody from, losing, a year's worth of mortgage payments, I think that's sort of where we're at.
Well, before we, and this bill, even though it's SB 482, means it originated in the Senate, where this program will be airing in April of 2026. So presumably it will be in the House, in the New Hampshire House, we'd be acting on it. And so we encourage you to look into it and check on that. Before we close, I want to just see if you have any advice, Lieutenant Yerkes, on what caregivers can do to sort of keep an eye on folks on their loved ones. Sure. In terms of fraud prevention, or just people in general, what we can do.
Sure, that's a good question. My group, my team goes out into the community fairly often. We talk to community members, we talk to groups, aging community, and they always ask, "What do I do? How do I protect myself?" We always say verify, verify, verify. A lot of these scams start with your computer, it has a virus. If you want to fix it, call this number, click on this link. All of these scams start with a story, as I said before, that elicits an emotional response, and then it's immediately some sort of money transaction. So we say, don't trust anybody telling you to go on their phone number or their website or their links. If your bank is calling you legitimately, or if it's a scammer who's saying, call this number, we're your bank, hang up the phone, call your bank. Even better yet, hang up the phone and go to your bank. Your bank folks would love to see you in person and sit down with you. Utilities, a lot of these times they're utility scams. Hang up and call the number you know. Don't ever call the number that they're giving you. Don't ever go to the website or the link that they're giving you.
Because they can be very convincing in what they produce.
And caller IDs can be spoofed. It can pop up on your caller ID with a Concord Police Department phone number, and they could say they're from the police department, and you may think that. We go back to verify, verify, verify. Always go back to your list of phone numbers, and if that's not enough for you, talk to your family members, talk to your neighbors. Say, hey, I just got this call. What do you think?
Yep.
We're confident that somebody in your life is going to talk you out of this and say this is not right. And if it is a legitimate entity calling you, you can figure that out in another way without immediately making a decision that's going to cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, I think I hope that we can do more to connect older folks who are living alone or who with the wider community, so that you can have people to talk to and things like that. But well, I want to thank you both for coming today. I don't know if there's any last words you have on the subject. Just look out for SB 482. Look out for regulation or anything about the cyber. I keep calling it cyber, but I'm not sure if that's the right term. The ATMs, the digital ATMs, and just fraud in general. AARP has a lot of resources on their website, aarp.org. We also have lots of, right here in New Hampshire, Speakers Bureau and the Fraud Prevention, Fraud Watchers,
Fraud Watch Network.
Fraud Watch Network, and they talk about these things. So we will be back next month. I want to thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you for having us.
We'll see you next time.